Talking about blood, sweat, and tears, as a leader of an organization, what are you straining with at the moment?
What am I straying with? That's a good question. I think it's a constant challenge of effectively how far can you progress and how fast you can do that. And sometimes that's the things that you can do. A lot of that is what's in your control, what you prioritize, where you push projects or people and your teams forward. But there's also areas of interaction with the industry. And is the industry ready for new models or new ways of thinking about things? And so for us, it's really, I think the way that the industry thinks about a lot of things in terms of ownership models and funding models, it's quite traditional, it's quite conservative. And so the thing that we're constantly pushing is that the demand from consumers and from the market is there. And if we scratch one level between what a person or an organization says they're doing and look at, okay, what is it fulfilling for your potential customer? That's where the beneficial conversations are, because as we all know, we as Gryd, we're focused on the residential housing market. It's an incredibly difficult time. And so there's that saying that if you keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results, then that's the definition of insanity. And so I think that what we're seeing now is that it is a fertile market for innovation. In a way, I think some of the roots of innovation come from real need and often challenging market conditions. Buyers are struggling with affordability, and developers are struggling with housing costs and labor costs and material costs. So I think for us, it's just pushing through that and getting the message out there that there are ways to do things better, even if that's different.
Mm. So you mentioned about developers, and there's a number of clients that you're trying to help, and they're your clients. But for those that have never heard of you or what you're trying to do, what three things would you give as advice for developers? And then at the back end of that, what then would you say for those people that are looking to purchase a home to help them buy the right home for them, not just right now, but also one that takes them forward into the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think advice to developers, we've mentioned it before, but there are massive challenges on this transition, future home standard, and just generally energy transition, but also the market. Buyers incredibly challenged with affordability, developers also on the costs of building materials. I think there has to be a move away from regulations as being the standard, really. That should be looked at as the minimum. And I think, as we've mentioned, the challenges right now require both innovation and ambition. And I think it's that taking on this ability to solve some of your problems that you're having with some of the ideas and solutions that are out there. I would say the other one is what we've seen sometimes is there's a little bit of inertia, specifically revolving around the technology. And it's understandable, right? We've seen that air source heat pumps have obviously come quite a long way. There's also ground source heat networks and other shared heat networks. Those are kind of the emerging front runners in heating and hot water, and there are others. But in a way, solar and battery has become pretty stable. Most people have really high confidence in those two things as technology. So there shouldn't be this kind of real worry about, if we put this in now, this thing's going to get replaced. Those kind of four technologies I've mentioned are already fairly stable, either already front runners or emerging as such. And I'd say, the last thing is, and it links to the consumer point, is that not only do consumers want things that go beyond regulations, but also there has to be this strong understanding of a consumer proposition and the way that it links to that financial offering. And I think that the challenge that consumers have and developers have by that virtue is newer offerings, even where they have really high economic arguments and benefits, need to be well understood by consumers in order for them to kind of get on board with a different way of doing it. So I think for consumers, it's really about, if you understand what the offering is from a financial point of view, what, like we talked about, is there an investment that is tied to this? What's the return? How long is it going to take me to pay it back? What are the savings and the risks? If you can understand that, then when you are presented with different offerings, and we're one of a few, then you can start to build a picture as to, does this suit me, or does this actually not suit me right now, and later down the line I will? And what we have been building with Gryd is really this flexibility to get the benefits of solar, but not be tied into having to own it. And in a way, you're kind of getting, we like to say it's the benefit of getting a premium home, but without the cost associated with it. And so, yeah, it brings us back to that real core message of, we're working with developers to future-proof their new homes, and doing it zero hardware costs, really, for the solar battery.
I like that, especially the concept of, you're taking green technology or perceived green technology and putting that into the utility space and using it on a subscription model like you would with your broadband, or maybe even Netflix or Disney or whatever kind of TV package that you've got, instead of taking a capital sum and then calling it an investment, but really parking it in somewhere that's going to sit there for a long time and not really work that hard for you.
Exactly. I mean, the way that any large-scale renewable is invested in is like large-scale infrastructure, right? Solar farm, wind farm. And so there needs to be that unraveling of this idea that a local level infrastructure, like on-site generation, storage, the only mechanism is for you to own it. It's kind of, if people could generate their own broadband on site, I feel like people would do that. That's right. And so it's the same way that you went from having to buy and own lots of CDs and lots of music to now you have access to the whole world's library through subscription.
One of the things that that I have discovered is that there needs to be 3 breakthroughs. One is the breakthrough with myself, so I need to change my own thinking. Then I need to have a breakthrough with my team. I need to have my team change their thinking. And then the next breakthrough is those customers that are closest, that are maybe the early adopters, to take that to them and have a breakthrough with them. But the start, and I make reference to you being a leader of an organization, the start is always with the leader of that organization having that breakthrough themselves, being able to see something differently. And I really love the point that you made, that you do need a challenge and a problem in order to come up with something great. Greatness doesn't happen because there are no problems. Greatness happens because there is a problem. And I think that in the whole discussion around ESG, and people talk a lot about net zero, and definitely within the residential space, there is a problem, and there are few people that see excitement in the fact that there's a problem. I'm one of those people that see and feel excited because there is a problem, because I know at the back end of it, there's something great that will come out.
Yeah, no, it's, we're aligned 100% on that. And I left my engineering career as an engineering consultant to pursue this and to build something in this space that helps homes easily transition not only to things that are sustainable, but things that fundamentally save them on their bills. So my experience before was all about us designing large-scale engineering and infrastructure on mixed-use developments in the UK and abroad. So things like campuses, towns, and even whole regions out in Saudi Arabia. I think when I saw the energy crisis happening, I'd already had all of this great experience working on energy projects and doing design and management. But the thing that catalyzed it was, well, this is a huge challenge, and a curiosity as to the solutions also exist, right? You and I know that anyone who, when the energy crisis started, they could have, if they were able to, purchased a heat pump, solar PV, and some batteries, and they could highly insulate themselves from energy price swings. Now, as you and I both know, there are massive challenges within that journey in terms of, is your home right, except, for a heat pump, do I need X, Y, Z in first? But the biggest barrier really is, well, it's not necessarily a very accessible route for you to have to fork out 15,000 plus to do that. And the payback on that takes a long time. But as coming back to what you asked, fundamentally, my belief when I left, coming up to about, 3.5 years ago now, was this is a huge problem, the energy crisis and the energy transition, and who's going to solve this for the homes in a way that really makes sense economically, and is equitable and can do it at scale. And that's why I jumped out. And still, what gets me up every day in the morning is, how do we make this energy transition more accessible, more equitable for homes?
So how do you do that? I'm just thinking back now to younger version of Darren. I've shared this on previous podcasts before, is I was brought up by parents that didn't have any money. And I know that £15,000, or the equivalent of back then, it would have just been miles and miles out of reach for them. But they would have been keen to use renewable technology, not just because of the price swings, but also because of the feeling of having something that you are able to have on your property that is generating energy and that's more sustainable than just pulling from a coal-fired power station, and other reasons as well. So just looking at that as a big obstacle, so they would have the desire, absolutely want this technology, but in terms of that access to get that, absolutely no hope at all. Are you saying that you're trying to bridge that gap?
100%. So I think, to start with, the way people think about renewables traditionally is, you don't have them on your home yet, and the only way for you to access the benefits and the savings that come from it are for you to own it. And that means either you need the upfront cash, or increasingly what the market has provided solutions for is financing. But the challenge with both of those is, firstly, it doesn't really, and I know you speak quite a lot about this on some of your podcasts, is the financial literacy part of it. So if you are financing something, that is a loan, and that is an investment that you're making, and there has to be, for it to make sense, a financial return, right? And so we know renewables drive savings, but typically it can take 8 to 12 years to pay off that initial upfront investment. And so there are a lot of people who just aren't going to be in their property long enough. We hear that time and time again. And so from our point of view, the solutions that exist are all about owning something, which you're liable for the maintenance and the upkeep, you're tied in potentially to that property. And it's an outdated way of thinking about it, really.
The other thing with that as well is, you're talking about the payback period. So if I've got £10,000 and the only way that I am benefiting from that £10,000 is to wait for 7 or 8 years, that isn't a really good, smart investment if all you've got is £10,000, because you can put that £10,000 somewhere else, and you, within that 8-year period, can probably get somewhere like maybe even 25, maybe 30, maybe £40,000. You'd be thinking, that's a really good return on investment. Mm-hmm. So the scenario that you just painted there, just to kind of make this clear for the audience, is you invest £15,000, and in 8 years' time, you've got a return, as in you've paid that £15,000 off.
Exactly.
So that's That's not like getting Apple shares or shares in
Yeah.
in Tesla stock.
Yeah.
If all I've got is £15,000 and I'm looking for a good return on the investment, then it's really going to be low on my list to go and get this type of technology, because the return on that investment, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And it's compounded by the fact that typically the sell-through value of renewables is unproven. So let's say, I guess the two things are, like you said, could I invest the opportunity cost of this investment? Could it be better invested elsewhere? The second one is, how long am I going to be in this house tied to this asset for me to recoup that? And if you look at the statistics, about 60% of first-time buyers move within 5 years. And typically, even though the average tenure is a bit higher, most people put themselves as within that 5 to 8 year period of when they're going to leave. Most people, they kind of over egg a little bit as to how soon they'll leave. They think they're going to leave sooner than they typically do. But what that creates is this anxiety about, well, Darren, why should I invest 10K if I might leave in year 5? Because as I was saying, it's still so unproven that if I sell the house, that somebody else is going to add on 5K or more, and for there to be a genuine return on investment. So it's still, it really, when you kind of start looking at it, there are lots of financial reasons as to why it doesn't make sense for a lot of people.
But what you would do is, if you had your own house, you would say, right, I'm going to renovate the kitchen maybe, or the bathroom, because I know if I renovate, maybe I've got an open plan kitchen, I can include a diner in there. I've got a nice new kitchen in there with good worktops. I know that is going to add to the value of the house.
Yeah, exactly. So there are the signals, the price signals from the market for renewables are just so much weaker than the price signals for a new kitchen, an extension, an additional bedroom. Those effectively have proven ROIs, return on investments, whereas the renewables, it's a lot more down to who that buyer is when they come, and there's just a lot more sensitivity in the market for that. So you just may not get that back.
So we're all feeling that pain. We all know where that is. What is it that you're doing or what is a path to overcome that problem?
Yeah, so the path that we've looked at, and you mentioned bridging the gap, is new homes have standards to meet for reducing carbon. The problem is those regulations aren't designed to meet a homeowner's needs in terms of energy security and resilience and savings. And so what we do is we fund a optimal size system onto a new build home on behalf of the developer, taking away that risk of them funding something that they won't get a return for. And we take away the need for ownership from homes. So we're effectively putting on premium features, much more solar and battery, zero hardware cost. So it's a more affordable home to buy for a buyer and build for a developer. And then it's cheaper to run because instead of a developer only putting 2 to 4 panels on or none at all in the current regulatory environment, we've put on sometimes 200, 300% of that. So on one of our sites, we went from a developer doing 4 panels, no battery, to 16 panels and a large battery. So suddenly the home has 70 to 75% of their energy needs completely secured, versus in the other scenario, they're paying the capex for those 4 panels, but they also have very limited security on their energy.
So that's completely changed the model. So what that then means is you become the energy supplier to that house?
Yeah, in a way, it's a energy service provider. So our model is also, it's not on a per unit basis, which is another, way important thing to explain to homeowners. It's more like broadband. So every month the cost is the exact same for the electricity from the solar and battery, and a home will still have their other energy retailer of choice that they can use. We make suggestions which ones can save them the most, and then you can, there's no restrictions on the usage. So they could use every kilowatt hour of energy from the solar and battery in that month. and it wouldn't make any difference. And it typically secures about 70% of their overall electricity needs. So they know, let's say it's £70 a month, that's how much they're going to pay in January, all the way to Gryd, all the way throughout the year. And the only part that changes is the bit that they're getting from their retailer.
Yeah. So how does that work then when someone lives in that property, say for 2 years, and then they decide to move out? And I'm making a big assumption here that that your contract is for longer than 2 years, and maybe this, I don't know, say there's 5 years as an example. And then so I move into that property, I then have to agree to sign up with yourself because I've moved in that property as the new owner. Is that the way that it works?
Yeah, effectively. So though our agreement is like upstream of the first purchaser with the developer, the first purchaser has the right on day one to buy the system outright, typically cheaper than it would cost for a retrofit, or to subscribe. And the reason is, in their first year, we're typically looking at anywhere from 350 to 450 plus in savings, without them adding any extra cost onto the purchase price of the house. So they're getting that 350 plus savings locked in, increasing year on year because of increasing energy prices. So after 2 years, they didn't pay a 10K premium, and they got those savings and they can walk away. And the way that we're set up contractually is, it's not a hire purchase. It's not it's not these kind of car financing models where you are liable at the end to pay it off. It actually sits with the property, and then it puts the onus on the next purchaser who has, again, equal choice to buy outright before they move in if they don't want a subscription, they think they're going to be there long term, or to subscribe. And that choice exists in perpetuity, really. So after, our contract lengths are 25 years. At the end of those 25 years, the system is gifted to whoever owns the property. But along that timeline, the buyout price is decreasing linearly, and they always have the choice. So it's literally like the upgrade. There are so many apps that we now have, and you can upgrade your service level, right? And you go from ChatGPT to ChatGPT Plus. So it's the same thing. If you want to, suddenly you say, I don't want to subscribe anymore, I want to own, you literally go into the Gryd app and make the request that you want to purchase the system outright, and it would be like that. And we think that that's a lot better solution than homes being built with 2 to 4 panels, and then downstream a buyer goes, and we've talked to installers about this as well. Some of them are anecdotally talking about, we've had to rip out, because a lot of the newer builds, 2 to 4 panels in roof, and they're saying we then ripped out the roof tiles to add in and retrofit an additional system alongside it. So it's, we're future-proofing these new homes by putting these systems in,
maximizing them. So effectively, the system is linked to the mortgage.
It's linked directly to the property. So in some ways, it is effectively, I guess it's just, somebody could have bought the house out in cash, but it would still have that lease unless they bought it out from us.
You're right, yeah. And plus the loan isn't with, or the agreement isn't with the mortgage lender, it's with yourself. So in that way, it's not linked to the mortgage. Okay, fine. So what you're doing is you're taking the cost of that, spreading that over the 25-year period. So the monthly payments on that are not going to be super, super high because of the term that it's over. And then, so what about the maintenance? Because I know that inverters may need to be shifted and changed and looked after.
Yeah, so we take care of all of the operation and maintenance. We also replace the battery and inverter once during the lifetime. So whilst a solar PV typical lifetime is 25 years, batteries and inverters are between 10 to 15. So with us, that those things are going to be replaced within 10 to 50 years and at no cost to you. And because of the fact that we're generating on site in terms of on the roof of that person's home, we're baking in savings, that subscription price effectively comes with a 20% saving on day one, versus if they had no solar or if they had a very small system.
What other things do you think are needed in order to overcome the housing issue that we've got within the UK at the moment, and that combining with the effects that we're seeing from climate change and needing to change the way that we build?
I think that the positive thing that we're seeing is that there are signals that people understand the scale of challenge that the industry is facing. So first being regulations are moving in the right direction. They are as maybe frustrating as it is for people like ourselves. Sometimes we think of, entrepreneurs often think of regulation as this thing that's holding people back. But in this case, we have to admit that Part L of Future Hope Standard is kind of pulling the standards up. So that's an encouraging sign. I think things like planning reform are increasingly coming up the priority and are showcasing that people are taking this very seriously. And the third thing I think is that there are more solutions now than there were a couple of years ago. So whether that's people like ourselves and others in the funded space for electricity, there are lots of funded solutions in the heating and shared heat networks. And so I think in a way, you asked about the kind of blood, sweat and tears. I think to be an entrepreneur, you have to be incredibly ambitious. And I think that what we're seeing is that there are lots of forward-thinking developers out there who are using this as an opportunity to differentiate themselves from others because of their ambitions to be either net zero builders or EPC-A builders or deliver really high value and energy efficiency and high quality to homes. So I think it's that everyone recognizing that the scale of the challenge is really big and stepping up really to those challenges. And it's not a one size fits all. We shouldn't get too bogged down in analysis paralysis. There are lots of solutions out there, and I think you develop that muscle memory as you start implementing and start working through the nitty gritty challenges of, okay, what would it mean to trial this thing or pilot this thing or and so on.
Saudi Arabia has some extreme heat in the summer, especially compared to the summers that we experience here in the UK. What lessons have you taken from the experiences out there working on a variety of buildings, or what lessons could we take from the way that they deal with heat over there and implement that into the way that we build?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, and I like the way that you phrased it, because if you look at, I think the short answer to that is architecture has a massive role to play in shaping our cities and the spaces and how we experience them. The challenge, and why I said it was great you asked it this way, is that sometimes when we think about mega cities in Saudi Arabia or United Arab Emirates, we think of maybe not thinking about sustainability and not thinking about architecture. But actually, if you look at the roots of architecture and urban design in the region, and by that I mean the idea of courtyards and the idea of streetscapes and streets that are sized to allow for that natural cooling and natural shading. And I think that the challenge that modern industrialized cities have is that often they can be combative of the climate or of how we should be designing things to work with nature. And so I think that like shading is a massively underrated tool that we should be using both in the UK, and you see how it's used there, whether that's how do you encourage walking in a 45 plus climate, right? So But suddenly, if you've got the architecture where all of the streets are being shaded by each other, you are creating you're bringing down the overall temperature. Whereas if you build a city like New York in UAE or in Saudi, then of course you're going to get all of the challenges that come with building a city like that in the desert. The final thing I'd say on that, and just my experiences in Neom specifically, is whilst it's had lots of challenges, I think that you really do have to applaud the level of ambition, the conviction, and the investment into innovation that they are putting there. So whilst I'm not necessarily going to comment on the progress of the project itself, it's sometimes the way I think about it is like a innovation, research and development for the built environment, and lots of great ideas and investment and progress was being pushed out there, which was, for a young engineer, was exciting to see those kinds of things.
So I guess it's kind of a real life laboratory, right? Where you're testing and failing and learning and progressing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I hadn't heard of it before I went out there, that we were looking at piloting a concentrated solar plant, which is, kind of almost something you'd see in like sci-fi movies, where you've got all of these kind of panels concentrated towards the source and a stream coming through. And it was, I don't know where they've gotten to now, but it would have been the largest, is the largest test for that technology in the world.
The other thing that came to mind as well, as I was considering the climate in Saudi compared to the UK, is it doesn't rain for a long period of time. And then when it does rain, the ground is so hard that you get flooding, you get the runoff, which I think that we're going to experience more in the UK. But I'm making a grand assumption here. I've never been to Saudi Arabia, but I would imagine that there would be things in place, or you would at least be used to it. What have you learned over there, or what goes on over there that you think that the UK needs to either consider including or consider including when it comes to the way that we design for a warmer, drier climate, especially in the summer?
It's a huge challenge, and I've seen, my perspective of how we design for climate and different frequency events. That's the technical engineering term for it. That's been defined by my experiences across the UK as an engineer, also parts of my childhood and heritage being from my parents being from Sudan, and me visiting and seeing the infrastructure there, and also Saudi, and working on the design of large scale infrastructure projects there. So I think there's lots to learn. As a kind of aside, part of the reason why I ended up in infrastructure and engineering, civil engineering in particular, was going in my childhood to see my family in Sudan, and we would experience that. We would experience the rain, which, by the way, would be a respite from the heat. So usually when there's rain, you've got a storm, and it's like, for me at least, I'd be like, okay, great, we can now go outside and everything. But the problem was, it would cause these real strains and challenges on the infrastructure. The roads would flood, and it would be hard to get from place to place. And that's just because the infrastructure wasn't there. And that disparity was something that really sparked my curiosity, and in many ways what drives that desire to create equity where there's potential disparity. Then on the flip side of that, when it's come to designing systems, I think infrastructure generally is quite interesting when you look at development of countries and the stages that they go through. So again, coming back to Sudan, there's very limited fixed fiber. There's very limited broadband. It's largely mobile data driven internet. And so they've skipped an infrastructure step. They've not put in that fixed fiber. And you'll see developing countries do that sometimes. And they will skip that step. In Saudi, when we were looking at designing infrastructure, is actually there was quite a high bar in terms of what the design should be meeting in terms of extreme events. Typically in the UK, you design stormwater, which is, after storm, the flooding or stormwater runoff, and how that protects people. You typically design that for a 1 in 100 year storm. So that happens once every 100 years. What we're seeing is those things are happening more and more frequently. And so there's a real need for us to learn from whether that's Saudi and them actually like looking at 1 in 1,000 year storms is something that we need to make sure that we're doing to future-proof our cities.
Because I think that, I think that you're right. The way that things are designed, not just in the UK, I think this will apply across the world, will need to shift and change. And I think that one of the benefits of that is to go to countries like Saudi and also Sudan and say, you've been living with this extreme heat for many, many years. For us in the UK, it's probably a relatively new thing that we've been hitting highs of 40 degrees, but highs of 40 degrees in those two countries, it's not unusual, is it?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you manage that? What lessons can we learn here? And even looking at places like southern Spain and southern France, the way that the architecture is there and the way that they manage the heat there is different. But they're then reaching, I think it was recently in, was it Turkey? No, it was in Turkey and Greece. They were getting highs of 51, 52 degrees. So that's quite recently. So when you start to project forward and kind of look to 2035, 2045, I think it's quite easy to see how these, what we class as normal temperatures now in this country, are going to become a thing of the past. And so we need to start kind of looking forward. And I'm wondering here if this is kind of like the elephant in the room in the industry to say, we know that the climate is going to shift, that this thing that we call climate change isn't a temporary thing, it's going to be a new way moving forward. And where do we go to learn the lessons that have already been learned in those countries that have already operated quite comfortably and quite well at those higher temperatures, but here in the UK and around kind of Northern Europe, not so much?
Yeah, I think it's, look, if we just rely on active cooling, and by that I mean AC and other technologies as the primary way for, if we think about it as a home by home level, either you can afford AC or you can't, maybe you're just on fans. But if we increase the overall number that need that, then we're perpetuating that cycle, aren't we? We're making it so that, because generally AC as a technology is quite damaging to the climate. So we almost need to go back to first principles, but that's harder, isn't it? It's harder to say, there are places in when you go on holiday, you go to these countries with the really narrow streets, right? And that's really good for keeping the temperature cool. But there's so much baked into how we expect developments to look like in this country that make it difficult for us to, I think the main thing is we do need to move away from what is being done as this is the best way to actually, what are the unconventional ways? What are the natural, more natural ways to cool and to create cooling where you're not putting the pressure on one individual to choose between, the sweltering heat, a fan or AC. So I think that's the sort of the step up and step back that we need to take. Otherwise, we are building more developments that are potentially increasing this challenge.
Which is interesting because when you look back historically in the UK, the streets were wide because of horse and cart needed that width in order to get the size of the animals and all the rest of it down, as well as deal with all of the byproducts that come from the animal. So it's a completely different setup back then, which is then, like you're saying, kind of created the picture in people's minds to say, this is what good looks like. We need this space. We need this. We need it to look like that when actually moving forward. I don't think it's going to work as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that plans out in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's that we need more imagination. We need more novel and innovation and thinking of not the like replacement, right? I think like the famous saying from Henry Ford is, if I would have asked the people, they would have said faster horses, right? And so we went from that to automobiles. And I think where we've seen the most livable cities in the world are highly dependent on mass transit. But what we've done in a way is we've replaced, in terms of in most cities nowadays, the sustainable thing is replacing a car with another car. That's, an EV. But we can't all, if everyone could afford them, would that solve the congestion issues? Would that solve the mobility and the movement? Would that be the healthiest, most livable city?
Just create another problem.
Yeah. And I think that's we're sometimes too short-sighted in. We replace something that's good with something that's also good, potentially better, but it doesn't necessarily mean it solves the holistic problem.
Great. Yeah, it reminds me of the, I don't know if you've heard of the story before, but colonial Britain, when they were ruling India, they were upset at the amount of cobras that were biting people. And so what they decided to do is say to the Indians, what we're going to do is we're going to pay you for every dead cobra you bring to us. And that will eliminate the cobra problem. And so the entrepreneurial side of India then said, I know what we're going to do. We're going to breed cobras because that's going to help us to earn some good money because we can just supply more dead cobras. And then the British then caught on to what was going on and said, right, okay, the scheme's off. We're no longer doing this. And so the cobras then don't become worth anything. So then they get let loose. So there's more cobras now than what there were originally. And so I think that the same principle exists with right, everyone needs to get an EV. Don't think that's going to solve the problem. Because we're creating a bigger problem later on. And that's without going down, looking at how lithium is mined and all the rest of it. But there, like you're saying, there needs to be a change, not just in the way that we do things, but before I think there needs to be a change with us individually. Say, right, I need to change my thinking, then change my team's thinking with those that are closest to me, and then the thinking of other people.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. That's the only way we can do it, really.
Just for the people that are listening, that are coming out of university or maybe out of school, and they want to maybe start their own enterprise, but they want to have something or do something that makes a difference. What 3 tips or principles would you give that you have found beneficial that they can adopt and apply to enable their growth forward?
In terms of like on their journey to becoming entrepreneurs, or
being an entrepreneur or making a difference in the world, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think it's so important, I think, that you tie what the vehicle of your time and your work to something that is mission aligned and mission driven. So I think that where you feel what you're doing ties into that broader mission that you have and that broader purpose, then that makes just such a massive difference. I think it's really important to the journey itself. You'll need lots of people that support you, but I think you have to have really high self-awareness. It's there's a lot of romanticization. Not sure if that's the right word. Romanticizing. There's a lot of romanticizing of the journey of an entrepreneur, and I think that does it a disservice, because going back to blood, sweat and tears, that's what it requires, and requires a lot of commitment. And the reality is that it requires a lot of conviction as well. You have to really, really believe in what it is that you're doing. And like, you really have to find that thing that meets you in a place where not only are you the right person to solve this, you've got some of the right experiences, you're really excited by it, and you know, it's kind of aligned with your mission. And there has to be some element of high aptitude in that thing that you're doing. So almost don't settle for the thing that you don't have full conviction in, right? I think try and fail and learn, but if you really think you're an entrepreneur, then your first idea probably won't be what you end up building. Your second idea still might not be what, you know, it's going to take a long time till you land on that thing that you're like, this is it. Like, I'm in this, and I'll do whatever it takes to build this.
Mohamed, it's been really great having you on the podcast. So I appreciate your wisdom, perspective, and I wish you well for the future.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure to be on.
Thanks for watching to the end. I think that you'll like this, but before you do that, just make sure that you've commented and liked below, and also that you've subscribed.